I call this meeting to order. Today is February 5th, 2026 at 6:34 p.m. All right, let's do a roll call. Is Alderman Frank Thorpe present?
Present.
Okay. Alderman Smith Brown, Alderman Brooks Shandomeyer is on the way. Let's do the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve of the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Business and miscellaneous items. I have the honor to have this piece here, election of chairman pursuant to City Code Section 2.16.120. Is there a motion to elect a chair for this committee?
Yes, I would like to nominate Alderman Smith Brown to be the chairman of the Rules Committee.
Okay, thank you. There's a second. I'm all in favor of the election of Alderman Smith Brown for chair of this committee. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Aye. Moving on to the legislation piece here, we have O4125. This is the changes in exempt service job classification. We have with us today, thank you very much, Neely, for being present, the Chief of Staff for the Mayor's Office in the City of Annapolis. If you don't mind, starting wherever you believe is best.
All right. Thank you guys for having me. I have my little elevator pitch here. So I just wanted to start off, Jared's campaign promised a responsive city government. Adding a deputy chief of staff will help ensure the mayor's priorities turn into real results. We need to build a strong, well-coordinated mayor's office that improves the flow of information and collaboration across departments to set the city staff up for success. When systems work and teams are aligned, projects move faster and residents see a government that responds to their needs. Adding another senior staff to the mayor's office is a step in the right direction to achieve Annapolis Works. So I'm sure you guys already know all this, but I just wanted to lay out kind of the reality of the current Annapolis government structure. Mayor Lippman is the executive, and he's not just a ceremonial mayor. He's highly active politically and regionally, and then I will even add internationally. We actually hosted, we have 14 sister cities, and we have a partnership with St. John's, and we actually hosted visitors from Korea 2 weeks ago here. So that's another kind of touching point that he has. The mayor's office leads policy, communications, and is involved in a lot of cross-departmental initiatives and issues. The current structure is stretched beyond sustainable capacity. We have a need for better systems and more support, particularly in communications. You all know how much our PIO from the mayor's office works. Additional staff to help review kind of all of the press releases and information that come through her door will also be helpful. And we also want to prevent people like Mitchell from working too hard and leaving. All right, so why now? We have an increasing intergovernmental business and resident demand. There's a need for faster response, execution, and clearer accountability. We've talked a lot about in the mayor's office just implementing new systems and software to help us all across the city do our jobs better, more efficiently. There's a lot of growth and redevelopment currently, like the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, which I'm sure you guys have heard about, as well as complex projects like City Dock, which put more stress and demand in the mayor's office. So just want to quickly kind of go over what the chief of staff, the current responsibilities are. Mainly, I'm a strategic advisor and trusted confidant for the mayor. We do a lot of strategic coordination, setting the priorities and long-term goals. Executive support, obviously managing the mayor's schedule, making decisions about kind of like the gatekeeper, what comes in, what priorities, when and where he should be. And then there's a lot of stakeholder and intergovernmental relations. Just as an example, we're right now in the state 90-day session. So us and the city manager are actively working with our state lobbyists, reviewing bills, making sure that we coordinate with the different departments in the government to either have them write written testimony or actually go in person to testify for supporting or opposing those bills. So that's just one example of some of the intergovernmental relations stuff. So we have to deal with the state delegation, and then there's also our federal representatives that reach out and are expecting communication from the mayor's office. And then also help the mayor lead crisis and issue management. Obviously, during the storm, I was a point person for a lot of information coming in and out and coordinating through all the departments. And then I also have a team that I manage. I have to manage the mayor's office, the budget, and supervise all the staff. So we have kind of a couple buckets of people that work in the mayor's office. We have our outreach team, which does a ton of events. That's where our Hispanic and African American liaisons are throughout the year, and just coordinating, and they're really on the ground, the one-point touch points to the residents. And then there's the communications, the PIO, and then constituent services, which is taking all of the resident requests and demands and helping them navigate our system, and then the community engagement piece of it as well. So the next slide kind of just quickly goes over what a deputy chief of staff would do in the mayor's office. They would be a senior advisor and oversee key policy portfolios. An example is housing. Right now, there's no one really in a director of housing, for example. So it's an item that needs focused, and we would like to have particular policy portfolios where we can be strategic and have somebody focused on moving those things forward. Also, just operational support for the chief of staff. You could spend all day just with the mayor in meetings and scheduling and taking phone calls to coordinate his efforts. So having operational staff for the full team to support myself would be go a long way. Also, just supporting issues and responses. I think it would help with troubleshooting things that get stalled, different initiatives that we're doing, managing cross-departmental issues, as well as ensuring follow-through on decisions that the mayor made, and making sure that we follow up with those that are requesting things from the mayor's office. And also, it's just someone who can act on behalf of the chief of staff if I'm out with the mayor at other meetings or initiatives. And then the other piece of it that we think would be really helpful is for the city council and stakeholder coordination, which I have more detail on the next slide about that role. So our thought is that the deputy chief of staff would be a point person for the city council, so a single source for all support from the mayor's office. This would help streamline communications and reduce delays and duplications of text messages or emails that we're sending to the council, and then also help really drive policy and follow through on legislation. And then there's also supporting the agenda development for all the city council meetings, as well as setting the work sessions and coordinating who's presenting at the work sessions, and getting those materials and making sure that people are attending them. And then the other thing where we could use support is manages the relationships with the community and the business leaders. This is just one example of programs that are run from the mayor's office. They did it in combination with Human Resources, is the city internship program, which is, I think, is a great program, and it's actually planning to be launched in March. So running that program and making sure that all the departments have the opportunity to get interns, and also give people in our city the opportunity to grow and learn what it is like to work in city government. So that's one big program that our office coordinates and runs. And then also the sister cities, just coordinating intergovernmental things, whether it's with the state or federal government. We also, another example is we have monthly meetings with the U.S. Naval Academy, the Caucus of African Americans. We meet with them on a quarterly basis. So just really helping kind of coordinate and make sure that we are touching all of these community organizations, because there are a lot, and we're getting a lot of requests to meet with the mayor. So that is pretty much it. I have one more slide. just the bottom line. The deputy staff adds capacity, which will help us just with the speed and coordination, reliability, and response time from the mayor's office, since that is a huge priority for the mayor. Also improving the outcomes for all the departments and residents. If we're more effective and more responsive, I think everybody, it's a coordinated effort, and it starts with the mayor's office. It also will free up the mayor and the chief of staff to focus on top level priorities and strategies. There's a lot of things that come up that we deal with on a daily basis that takes you away from that strategic thinking, which I think is something that the city really needs to start focusing on. We talk about strategic planning. It's really important to spend time up here and not be always in the weeds to move our city and our staff and everybody forward. So I just think that's a practical next step to achieve Annapolis Works, which I know you all have heard the mayor talk about. So I welcome any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I will start off with a question. What exactly do you envision for our financing of this position? How do you feel that we'll be able to fund this position? That's the first question, I think, from the public and just in general.
Yeah, so in order to put this legislation out there, we had to have a fiscal impact note. So the finance department has already said that there is funding to fund this position. And then, of course, we're going through the fiscal year 27 budget cycle. So I have put in for this position to be funded in the fiscal year 27 budget.
All right, thank you. I'll have more questions, but I'll offer for anyone else who may have questions, Alderman Frank Thorpe.
Thank you, Ms. Garrity. I appreciate the presentation. I've had the opportunity now for 67 days to watch the mayor's office and the demand signal, even before the storm. And what I've come to appreciate in the city of Annapolis is that no one department does anything alone. It's given me a better appreciation for the role of the city manager in the day-to-day operations to coordinate across the organization. One of the frustrations that I have had as I've learned the job is to find that one person that I can call that says, let me take care of it. Quite frankly, you have been that person. And so from a sustainability standpoint, the day-to-day operations I get is the role of the city manager. But I want to draw the attention to your slide that talks about supporting the city council efforts, because most of the short-term requests I get, and when I say short-term, people expect an answer in 24 hours or less, are addressed to Mayor Littman and Alderman Thorpe. And if we mire the mayor down or the chief of staff down in that, to your point, we'll never get anything done. So I think my point here is that I adamantly agree with your brief. And I just want to reiterate the importance of the deputy chief of staff being able to be in a position to, what I would say, take care of the urgent while you take care of the important. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. The second question I would ask is, as you build up the infrastructure in the mayor's office, and again, I've had the opportunity to work with you and Laura and Mitchell and see the operations. I've had a chance to work with the city manager. How would you differentiate your and the deputy chief of staff's and the strategic outreach person's job? How do you differentiate that with the role of the city manager?
That's a good question. I mean, we definitely all kind of interact together on the regular about a lot of stuff. And I think, a lot of the things that come to our office are coming from the departments too. So it always involves the city manager. So I think the way I would look at it would be that the chief of staff would be kind of like a liaison to the city manager. So anything that comes from the departments or the city manager that, the mayor needs they need the mayor's input on would come to the chief of staff, right? And anything that the council would need input on would go to the deputy chief of staff as like your liaison. So I think of it as two liaisons. And so it's like you would have that one point person in the mayor's office to get your answers, and the city manager and all the department heads would have, you know, the chief of staff to have all the answers. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I think that what that explains to me is a very clear structure of how to make things work, Annapolis Works. And also, I guess I would summarize what you just said. If you and the deputy chief of staff are not doing that, then the mayor's doing it himself, right? And-
You're absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah, and I think right now he's the contact for the council more than I am. You know, so he's taking on the role of what I would envision a deputy chief of staff would do. So then he can focus on the higher strategic issues.
Thank you. So one final question. And I'm going to make a statement and then basically ask if you agree with it. I believe that one difference that we've seen in the first 67 days of this administration is more management and guidance and direction from the chief executive officer. And I think I'll speak for Ward 8 constituents that they have been looking for that in a big way. I believe that if we don't have the infrastructure to do what you just explained doing, then we're going to almost default back to trusting everybody's doing the best job they can in their stovepipe with some significant lack of coordination across the organization. So that's my opinion. So rather than asking you to explain that yourself, would you agree with that? And do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think, you know, the responsiveness to the residents, like that's what it all comes back to. And if we want to be responsive and all be responsive in the same messaging, we need to make sure that our communication internally is better. And I think right now it's really hard for us to communicate with everybody we need to communicate with in a consistent way. Whereas if you're adding somebody who's good at communication and has their, you know, the city council communication, I'm communicating with the city manager, and, you know, the state delegates or whatever it is, dividing up who is in charge and responsible for communicating to all the different stakeholders, I would say, that come to the mayor's office. Yeah, for sure. And I also want to go back to one of your questions that you brought up. One of the things we're bringing into the mayor's office, just to make sure that we are spending our budget wisely, and we're not just adding more to the budget, is we've implemented status reports for our staff. We also have events that are now on the website, and you can track the number of attendants. So making sure that we're spending money wisely and getting the, you know, if we plan an event that costs X amount of money, how many people are coming? How much did that cost per head? So making sure that we have that data to justify how we spend our money in the mayor's office. So tracking data and metrics are really important to us to help us kind of manage how we'll spend our money.
Great. So thank you. I look forward to working with the Deputy Chief of Staff. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions before I ask mine? Okay, Alderman Shanmari, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is less questioning and more just my thoughts on the issue. A problem that many local governments have is each department gets siloed in its decision-making process. And that's just how it happens to be structured. The organization of Annapolis, the organization of Anne Arundel County, the organization of pretty much every local government in Maryland that I have seen, it sort of just naturally creates this issue. So the chief of staff and the city manager, part of their job has always been to try to bridge those silos, but it is a lot of work because it's not one of their key sole focuses. It just sort of becomes an unofficial duty. What I really appreciate that you've put down in the job description specifically is manage cross-department issues. Because what impacts planning and zoning often impacts transportation, often impacts public works, often impacts parks and rec. And a lot of times I have seen, not just in Annapolis, departments have gone, well, we're going to do this, and then the other hand finds out about it a little bit too late to be able to manage an effective and timely coordination. And so we see a seam in that decision. It eventually works out, but I like to have as seamless of a transition and decision-making process as possible, as do, I think, most of the folks in this room. So I'm very optimistic about this position. I'm looking forward to seeing what they'll be able to accomplish, and it has my full support.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alderman Schennemeyer. Anything you want to share in response before I ask these questions?
No, I think.
Okay, so some of the concerns I know that have been brought up is this may be an additional layer of bureaucracy. And so how can you alleviate some of that concern to us as committee members, just all the council who will have to work directly with this member, and even to the public who may ask that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what I spend my time doing and what the deputy chief of staff will be doing is communicating and coordinating with people. And there's only so much time in the day and so much you can do with coordination. So I think it's, it's a capacity thing. So the more an extra person will help with that capacity issue and be able to communicate better across all, whether it's the city council or if they're working on interdepartmental issues. I think just communication and coordination are key. And unfortunately, Vicki and I meet all the time, but there's only, there's meetings and other things you have to do and staff you have to manage. So that communication piece sometimes gets lost and balls get dropped. And that's what we're trying to avoid by adding this position.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question that would be is, when we think of up to $100,000 for a position, I know people may be frightened from that. So the question of, are there any other positions that are not being fully staffed, or maybe you can speak on that budgeting aspect, where this would make sense to shift that over to maybe a deputy chief of staff in this case, as well as why can't we just put these responsibilities on someone else? If that's the question that I'm sure people would ask. I'm not asking that personally, but just why can't we do that? It would be a...
Yeah, I mean, I think right now that's a great question, but in the mayor's office, everybody is already at their capacity for the work that they're doing. So that's why we're doing the data and metric tracking to figure out if what they are doing is successful. So if that is true, there will be room to either move them, to help with scheduling or do other things or help with strategic planning with town halls. So we are already doing that, adjusting to seeing what's available and moving it around based off of what we're trying to achieve in the mayor's office.
Marvelous, thank you. So if this position is denied for some reason, how are we going to move forward? Are we going to just bear the burden? What are we going to do?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure we want to hear that answer.
Yeah. No. I mean, it would be unfortunate because I do think the mayor's office is such an important, critical piece and the front face of the city government that we need to be responsive and we need to be communicating. And we've already heard it from what Alderman Thorpe explained his residents are saying. We're already taking communication to a next level. And even if we can still do better than what we're doing right now. And I think that's just going to improve the lives of all the city staff. And it's also going to improve the lives of our residents. And we're looking into, systems. I put in my fiscal year budget to add systems to help communicate and coordinate things, which I think will help everybody that touches the mayor's office, just to make sure we're organized and planning. I like to take action items and notes, as Vicki knows. and do spreadsheets, but yeah.
All right, thanks. So last question here. So seeing that this is a person that will work directly with the city council, what will our role be in making sure this is someone that we would want to have in this role?
Yeah, so I actually just went through the Ombudsman Constituent Services, and what we really focus on in the mayor's office, and I think across the city, we set up a committee of people from different departments. So the example for the Constituent Services, I had Marcus, who was on the panel with me reviewing resumes, Rosia from the mayor's office. And I picked Marcus because transportation is a huge, parking is always a constituent service resident issue, myself and Laura. So we always try to diversify the committee that's looking at the resumes, helping us select and making sure that they're qualified people. And then also when you're doing the reviews, we had a rating system and we all rated everybody we interviewed and had a number, and that was how we ended up selecting. I mean, of course, there was discussion about the people, but we try to be as fair as possible. So we are very diligent. We don't just handpick people.
Great. So what that sounds like to me is we still will have some type of say, although we are not going to prove any employment or anything, but we'll still be able to give you some input or thoughts, or just at least be a part of that process as you all narrow down your candidates.
Yeah, and once we post the job, everybody, you can share it and people can apply.
Okay.
And they'll be considered based off of the questions that are asked in the HR system, so.
Well, thank you very much, Chief
Yep.
of Staff. If there's not any final words, I say we move forward with a motion to, I won't say what that motion to be, I'll give that to you all, but I say, is there a motion to move this to the council? Positive
Chair, I would
support?
like to offer a favorable recommendation.
All right, is there a second for that favorable?
Second.
recommend- Awesome. I'm all in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, have a blessed one, Neely. I will move forward here with the agenda. We have O126, property tax, childcare centers, family childcare homes, and large family childcare homes. This is sponsored by Alderman Shannemeyer and Alderwoman O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, O126, the goal of it is, or the intention of O126 is to provide up to $10,000 real property tax credit to licensed childcare facilities in the city of Annapolis. It was enabled by the state during the last session, and one of the intentions of the enabling legislation was to help encourage more childcare facilities to open, to help bring costs down overall and shrink wait times. It's also something that could potentially help encourage childcare facilities to hire more staff so they can take on more children. And it could also be the difference between a facility opening or keeping its doors open versus shutting down. The childcare industry is an incredibly expensive one for people to run. They often have less than 1% profit margins, so many close. The state of Maryland has lost about 15% of its childcare providers since 2020. And so bold action like this is needed to try and, one, stop the bleeding, and two, potentially turn it around and bring costs down for our working families.
All right, thank you for that. Are there any questions from anyone? Alderman Thorpe, did you have any questions at all?
I do have questions and maybe a couple comments. We discussed this at the Finance Committee yesterday, and Alderman Shandelmeyer provided a lot of good information, and as did the city manager. I would again like to applaud Alderman Shandelmeyer for introducing this legislation. When we first started talking about it, we thought the cost was $85,000. It could be up to $850,000. Alderman Shandelmeyer, as you pointed out yesterday, it probably would not get to that amount, but we don't know what the amount is. The bigger issue that I believe that this committee, the Rules and City Government, should take on is an expenditure of more than $500,000 should be managed by the city staff. And as we've talked about coming into the election, that we should make sure we have an input-output model so that every dollar we spend, we should have an expected outcome. And from a city government perspective, I'm even more concerned after the discussion yesterday and after talking to Alderwoman O'Neill today, that we really are not organized currently to manage improvements in childcare across the city. There's no doubt we need to invest this kind of money in it. There's no doubt that the young families in Annapolis need support for childcare. I mean, it's just unequivocal. My concern is, how do we look at the city manager and say, how did this grant do? Did it achieve what we wanted it to achieve? Was this a better expenditure than any number of other options, including direct grants or expenditures to families to help with childcare? I don't know that answer, and my concern right now, and the discussion I'd like to have with the sponsor as well as the city manager, is if we believe that the city should invest, at this point, it could be up to $1 million with other programs. Should we have somebody in our community services department managing a program like this and reporting through the city manager as to the effectiveness and we're achieving our goals? And I guess I'd like to ask the city manager first to comment on what her thoughts are on that, and then open it up for discussion.
So I think based on the way that this is written, I'm not sure that there's necessarily a lot of day-to-day management to do. It's a tax credit, and so there's some work that's periodic in terms of establishing eligibility and then reevaluating eligibility. But once eligibility has been determined, then it's really just through the taxation process. As far as looking at outcomes for that, there are probably a couple of sources, again, depending upon what the goal of the council is, that are not terrible to track. So childcare is licensed through the state. You can go on the Maryland Excel's website, find a program. If you go on there today and you look for childcare in zip code 21401, right, there are 80 programs that pop up, right? And it includes information like what's their license capacity and some things like that. So, through even that kind of publicly available information, you can get some information about how many establishments do we have in the city? What is the license capacity within the city? And some things like that. And I think that is relatively easy to track in terms of what has been the trend over time. Tying those changes specifically to this, I think is, you would, there are probably some ways of getting at that, but just in terms of, what is the overall health of the childcare availability in the city, I think that is something we can get our hands around and look at over time. I'm not sure if that fully answered the question you asked.
I think it starts to go there. I'm not concerned about the management of the program. To your point, I think it's minimal. We don't license childcare centers. We don't evaluate the state's licensing, et cetera.
Exactly.
What I'm more concerned about is how I look at the residents, the taxpayers, and say, well, I spoke to the city manager, and she reported that we are meeting our goals for childcare for the city. And you alluded to that, right? We've got to figure out what the goals of the city council are for childcare. So I'm almost wondering if from a process standpoint, do we have a solution in front of a problem? I mean, we know that we have a problem with not enough childcare. We know we have limited funds to help, I don't want to use the word solve, to help alleviate that problem for our young parents. But how do I look at you in the eye, or how do you look at the city council in the eye and go, this was the right way to spend I say spend, this was the right way to give up $740,000 in revenue that costs us, I mean, clearly, we're going to have to adjust the budget, the 27 budget, by some amount that we anticipate this being a decrease in revenue. So I guess that's, but go back to my big question is are you as the city manager in a position to say, we achieved our goals in childcare with the expenditure or the lack of revenue of 740, or whatever the number is, and the expenditure of 50,000 and whatever else? And I think you've answered the question is you don't know what the goals are. We don't know what the goals are.
I mean, I think that part of what I've heard has alluded to quantity is sheer availability, partially through number of childcare businesses and sites within the city. Part of the way that this is constructed is also supporting capital improvements, so that also potentially affects changes in licensure, what the capacity of each individual site is. I mean, that seems like, in terms of we have a goal of increasing license slots by 100. I don't think the council has honed in on that. A desire for additional, that sounds pretty consistent across everything I've heard everyone talk about. I think to get to your point, the question of was that juice worth that squeeze is, I do think you need somewhat of both sides of what am I aiming for in order to figure out whether we ended up thinking that was worthwhile. The idea that it wasn't worthwhile implies that you had some metric in your head of what was worthwhile.
Thank you. And I guess that's as strong, that's as concise an answer as we're going to get. Alderman Schneidermeyer, I turn to you, I guess, to say is, if we don't bring somebody on the city staff, which I'm not looking to build the city staff, but is there a county or state child care person, community service person available that we could bring in and ask, if you had $1 million in the city of Annapolis, and by the way, that's $25 per resident. If you had $1 million, how would you spend it on child care in Annapolis? And is there somebody that, or somebody said to me today, one of the young families said, has this gone to the Education Commission to review and talk about? Is there somewhere where we could get the expertise that empowers us to be able to make that kind of decision?
So, look, part of the push for this legislation came out of a task force chaired up by County Executive Pittman, Comptroller Learman, and the Maryland Women's Caucus. I don't know a specific department in the county or the state, but I do know that this came out of an initiative from a task force last year and the year before that had legislators, local elected officials, and people in the industry itself. And this was seen as a thing that could improve the overall childcare environment. It was based off of legislation that was passed in Montgomery County. Previously, their legislation allowed up to $3,000 property tax credit. That became insufficient, and so they upped it to $10,000 at the same time that the Anne Arundel County and Annapolis enabling legislation was passed. And is there a way to truly measure everything 100%? I don't know. But the thing is we know that we have a crisis now. We know that a panel of experts from this task force came through, and this was one of their recommendations. And to not try it seems like we are backing away from attempting to solve a very real problem impacting our working families. The average wait time in this area is over a year just to get someone in childcare. I don't know if you remember the debate during the Expanding Daycares Act, but we had a woman come in who said, when I first found out I was pregnant, my parents told me to look for daycares now because you'll still be waiting after your kid's born a couple months. If this can cause more facilities to open or keep facilities from closing, that helps the environment. So the exact metrics you're looking for, I don't know if we can even get them, but the organization and the task force that came up with this idea, I trust the people that were on it, contained folks like Delegate Jones and Comptroller Learman and County Executive Pittman, and they are people who know this issue a lot better than me. I'm still learning a whole lot about the child care issue myself, but part of how I learned is trusting people who know what they're doing.
Thank you. I was going to, if you don't mind, I think though to that point, because that's exactly what I was going to ask, we should invite someone here to talk about this matter before we move on this. At least that's what I would envision. But please, yes, feel free to ask what you were going to.
I just wanted to respond to there's no doubt that we have a crisis. Matter of fact, to build on your point about the wait, I actually talked to a young couple who actually told me part of their family planning process is getting on a waiting list before they get pregnant. I mean, so it's that bad. So Brooks, I don't doubt the crisis at all, and I also don't doubt the legitimate benefit of this program. And to your point, the experts that went into doing it, I just know that we do have a crisis on our hands. We do have a limited amount of money. We're early in the term here, and we're finding numerous expenses that are coming down the road that we, are one step short of an economic crisis if we're not there as a city. And so I'm just looking to spend the money in the best place possible. And to Alderman Smith-Brown's point, to hear an expert say, of the 5 ways you could spend money, this is how I would rank them, or however they want to do it. That's what I'm looking for. So maybe we're onto something here that you've said is identifying somebody who's a recognized county, state expert, the Education Commission. I don't know the answer to that. I just know that I would like to hear somebody who lives in this world who could give us that kind of information.
Yes, do you mind please sitting?
Yeah, just if you're looking for someone, probably one of the places we could turn is to the state. The Maryland Department of Education's Division of Early Childhood does have different regions. Region 1 is Anne Arundel County, and they might be interesting to talk to.
Yes, so there were some questions that I had, but I think it'd be best to maybe offer that invite to someone, if not more than one, who could come and share that from different perspectives at all levels. One of them I know that I had here was, one of them I know that I had here is seeing that it could be up to $850,000. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars that could go to centers that may not directly impact the grassroots level of family care, and more so you're talking about 25 or so employees. So how do we delineate between supporting the families that definitely need this support, and not just giving more profit to these corporate-owned businesses, if you will. Let's kind of talk through that narrative.
The 25 or more is related to an entity that wishes to open a childcare facility as part of its, I guess, for lack of a better word, benefits. So let's say you had a company, Dave's Sales, and they wanted to, as a way to entice their employees or offer a benefit to their employees, have a child care facility to provide their employees with that resource. They would need to have 25 employees in order to qualify for this. In regards to larger child care companies, they still fall under the same pressures as smaller ones, where it's a lot of rules and regulations and qualifications that makes profit margins low, often 1% or less. And when they do not have the ability to hit those margins, the alternative is they close. And every kid who was in those programs now does not get childcare. And that just spills over and increases wait times or raises costs everywhere else because we have less providers in the system.
Okay. Yeah, I think just seeing to the diversity of these up to 85 centers would be really important for us to see, because we want to make sure that these, whether it's in Ward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we want to see where they are. We want to know, want to make sure that these businesses are reflective and won't be biased towards certain families, which I know that can happen at times. When we talk about wait times, I mean, I think sometimes we can open up our doors, but we choose not to. And so I want to make sure that that's talked through, as well as, let's say I might get this grant and it doesn't really define or detail what happens if I shut down the next day. How do we get that money back? Or how do we make sure that they're accountable for it? We don't really talk much about that in the legislation, at least from what I read.
So I think there's a misunderstanding. This is not a grant, it's a property
It's a tax credit. Exactly. So how do we get that money back, though, if it's a tax credit?
So they would need to have an active license in order to get the credit.
Okay, so if I shut my doors when I get this credit, I said, okay, I'm tired of this, I don't want to do this anymore, my license is still active, is what you're saying? So I will continue I can hold on to this money because my license is active? The point is made. If the license is gone, then where do we get this money back? We don't. And so unless we list it here that we are going to get it back, or there's going to be some type of accountability there. So we do have to tie that into the legislation as well.
I think you are coming up with a situation that is not going to occur. If a center shuts down, it does not have its license and they cannot get the tax credit. You need to have your active license going in order to get the credit.
The tax credit is in one lump sum, or is it spread out over the year?
Ms. Buckland,
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's the amount it's just the amount that's due, that's typically paid in a lump sum.
Okay, so if I get the tax credit and I shut down my doors after I get the tax credit, how do we get that money back?
So I just want to make sure I understand. So if they shut down, then what you would be looking to do is to essentially bill them for the difference and have that tax now become due instead of being credited. right?
Is that the result? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
What
I mean,
would the
I think
risk,
that
what
would
would we
have to,
do?
that would have to be the mechanism. I would have to research how that would work. I'm not saying that wouldn't work. I just want to understand the details.
No. Yes, Madam Lawyer.
Ashley Leonard, Assistant City Attorney. We might have to figure out the mechanism, but if I'm looking at the legislation, right, it already has a provision for it in there. I mean, I just pulled it off Legistar, but it looks like there is a section C2 that deals with automatic termination.
Yes.
That a real property tax credit for a child care facility granted under the section shall automatically terminate if the child care facility
Yes.
no longer meets the eligibility requirements. Now, we would have to think about that from an operational standpoint, but it's,
So that's actually a good question. My assumption was that essentially was prospective, right? If they've already paid their tax for this year and they've shut down, then
yeah. I mean, we
next
could,
year they're not.
yeah, we could look at it and tweak that section, but there was already some thought
Yeah, there was. That's why I was digging a
about
little
that.
deeper.
So it's not an issue that was not thought about. To some extent, it was thought about. Maybe you would like it phrased a little differently, but there is something in there to at least start with.
Absolutely.
And keep in mind, the tax credit is only for 1 year at a time. So it's not like this would be going on forever. Every year, the way this is set up, they would have to reapply. So at most, we're talking about them being closed for part of a year and losing that part. It wouldn't be beyond 12 months at most.
Every dollar matters. Thank you, Alderman Dorp.
Yeah, no, so I don't know how the calendar would work, but, and Alderman Schennemeyer probably knows this more, better than I do, but, you know, you apply for the tax credit in the year, you're asking for it, you're operating a child care center, you've got a license, you get the it gets approved in March, April, May, June, you get the tax credit. So I think to that point, the risk that the city would have in that child care center closing down, the few that might happen to for some reason, it would be a small number of months. To the Office of Law's representative point, they'd have to apply the next year, and if they didn't have a license anymore, we could be out
Yeah.
$900 a month for 2 or 3 months. I think I would almost worry about the burden that we would put on the city staff of monitoring that more so than the loss of the revenue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's someone who has actively used a lot of childcare in the last decade. I understand where you're coming from, but I do, from a legal and a personal perspective, I think it's a minimal risk. Most people who go into this business, it's not a fly-by-night, trying to get the licenses, trying to do all the inspections. It is a lengthy process. So you're not just going to do it to try and get a tax credit, to be honest. It's a whole process to set these places up and to continually maintain them and maintain your licensure. So while I understand perspective, and maybe we can look at the section about terminating, I think it's legally sort of a minimal risk for at most maybe part of a year. I don't think it's a high likelihood. I also wanted to mention that Anne Arundel County actually did have a child care task force. They have a website on the county's website. They have a webpage on there. So perhaps someone from there. They do have a lot of resources right on their webpage that you could probably look at, including annual reports and things. So I could send that out if you would like to take a look at that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Vicky, my city manager,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, maybe giving us a list of some names or some organizations. that
Yeah,
you-
like I said, at least the webpage does have a bunch of reports and recommendations and data so that you could at least start from that perspective.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I don't think it's a role of city council to do that research, though. That's my point, is
Yeah.
I think to your point, if the county has that level of expertise, what I would rather do is bring somebody in with that level of expertise and sit in a chair and say, I've been asked to tell you how I would spend $1 million of city tax money, and based on my expertise, and as you see programs listed on our website, this is the order I would do it. And then I would, quite frankly, look over at the city manager and say, so you've got to execute this. Does this make sense? That's where I would come down on it.
Yeah, so, and we do want to, yes, well-intentioned, we're human beings, we, are flawed, but the fact that there could be even just a hint of us having to figure out a way to get that money back, we should try to iron that out. It's definitely not saying it clearly, I read the termination piece and I understood it to be, but it's barely anything that details the termination. And so I think that for us,
legally, that's
like, the
generally not how
reaction-
tax credits work. And we do a lot of tax credits. Generally, tax credits, you apply for them, you get them for that year. It's not a grant. You're not going after the monies because that's not legally how tax credits tend to operate. And we offer other tax credits, and we don't have language to that effect, I don't believe, in our city code that says if someone applies for that tax credit and something changes, that we're going to go after them to get the money back. We won't renew it the next year, but the legal procedure for tax credits is not the same as like grant money. It's a different process. It's a different legal setup.
Thank you. Then for looking at this too, if a question came to be, then why can't we, because we are going to be, depending on how much money we would put towards this, why can't that money be directly given or provided to nonprofits or organizations that do run after-school programs? Or, why couldn't we go down that route?
We
Though this
do
is
that
just
route.
a-
That would be our
Yeah,
community grants.
No, yeah, we do that route, but we're talking
Yes.
about an additional up to maybe $850,000 that could be. So I'm just wondering, for those that may wonder, why can't that money, or why can't we figure out a way to give that money to those versus doing something like this?
Because not all of those are licensed to handle early child
Yeah.
care, and they just do not have the capacity.
Those tend
for
to
the
be more
demand.
aftercare type programs and other type of programming. To be able to do childcare, especially early childcare, is not something most nonprofits do because the licensing process is extremely intense.
Yes, it's very important to ask questions for all types of mindsets, perspectives, and thoughts, whether it's in support or not in support. We have to make sure that we're asking questions. And so this conversation must continue. And maybe at our next meeting, if we can, have some people to come and present some more detail. And maybe we can even come up with some more questions to ask for that. And I mean, come on, let's talk about it. We want to support our families. We want to make sure that they have a place for their child to go so that they can go and do whatever is necessary to put food on the table and a house over their head. So yes, we appreciate you, especially Alderman Schenemeyer, for even coming forth with such a solution, tapping into state resources and county resources in their direction for this. So, I think the sentiment is there, and we want to move forward and diving a little further. So, I take it we'll move with any other questions at all, or thoughts or concerns, questions, anything like that? Okay. Oh, thank you. I'm Ashley. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, is your move forward, is your desire to have this continued at the next meeting? Or
If there's a motion for that.
is
if we
your
can.
desire to move forward and make a vote on this?
I say we move forward for the next meeting. If there's a motion for that, I don't think that it would make sense to make a decision based off of everything we heard and, still having guests come forth if that's possible.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion to postpone this to our March meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second for that?
There's a second, and if we could get some discussion before.
Absolutely.
So I think I think I would ask, how do we, in the March meeting, how do we move forward to ensure that we have the expertise at the table to answer these questions? Because nirvana, perfection is when the county rep or the state rep comes and says, boy, if you guys are willing to do this, this is the best thing you could do for childcare. That's about a 2-minute brief and we're done, and we recommend to move this forward. But it's going to take getting the right person. So again, I'm looking at the city manager, I'm looking at Alderman Schandelmeyer. How do we get to a point for the March meeting where we get an answer?
So I think that I can certainly work with Alderman Schandelmeyer. You know, both Ashley and I, you know, obviously know of a couple of different places we could turn, and I can check in with Alderman Schandelmeyer about other ones, and frankly, simply reach out and see, check on availability, you know, have a conversation. Let you know.
Great, thank you.
what we
And
find.
the only other thing I would say, and this goes more to the Finance Committee, the other variable to this is the $10,000. Is the state went from 3,000 to 10,000 with the obvious, in my opinion, I'm just assuming that they wanted to increase the amount in order to make it more substantial and all that. But that's also the variable in this, that it could be 5,000 and use the other half of the money for something else. So just to say that now so that I don't want to pop open well, I thought of another question syndrome.
All right. Thank you both for that. Well, there is a motion on the table, so we do have to answer to that. All those in favor of having this brought back up at our next meeting, please say aye if you can.
Aye?
Thank you. All right. Let's move forward. This is very important as well. Land Value and Infrastructure Study Presentation ID 1926. Our Chief of Comprehensive Planning, Lashinsky, is coming to present to us. Thank you for the Urban 3 presentation, which Alderman Schandelmeyer helped to lead and bring forth to fruition, if you will. Yes, Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to give the background on this. I consider this
Don't
my
mind at all.
baby. So we conducted the Land Value and Infrastructure Survey towards the end of the previous term. And essentially, this helps us understand where in the city we are revenue positive and where in the city we are revenue negative. And I am very excited to hear the great concerns for how we can stay revenue positive, because I now assume we'll be boldly and without question going forward with every single recommendation that this study presented with 0 questions asked. Because if that is the case, I will be questioning some of these things. Anyway, this was led by a internationally renowned company known as Urban 3. I found out about them through the Strong Towns movement, and Urban 3 has conducted surveys from Auckland, New Zealand, to Canada, to right here in Annapolis, Maryland. And what they showed us in Annapolis is truly, absolutely mind-blowing. And I will let our birthday boy, Mr. Lashinsky, take it away.
Blessed birthday, you and Neil. Take us nearby.
Thank you, Alderman Schandelmeyer. Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning. Everything that the Alderman just said is accurate. It is. This was a profound study that we did in conjunction with our comprehensive plan. So I want to couch it in that way. You know, this vision of our comprehensive plan, this more equitable, healthy, resilient city. With the Urban 3 study, we got the data to really support that, and that's why it's so valuable. So when you do a comprehensive plan, you typically do a number of focus studies on more specific topics, and this was one of those studies. And this was by far the most impactful focus study we did. So I do want to commend Alderman Schandelmeyer for advocating for this. And it took on a life of its own. It got some national attention. The Strong Towns organization leveraged the report and promoted it. And, I just want to share a video if this works.
Yes, you may.
Snap of Annapolis, Maryland.
All right, hold on. Let me turn the volume down.
Love this video. We do not support that social media.
Let's try
It was
this.
on Instagram as well.
Check out this map of Annapolis, Maryland. The zones with the highest extrusions have the most valuable land areas in this state capital. This is called a land value per acre map done by Urban 3. And if you compare that with the city's annexation history, the highest value land was acquired before 1951. Along with the drastic change in how much land our cities acquired, the 1950s was also a time that shifted how we developed our cities too, creating compact incremental development for the suburban experiment. But this data shows that the spread out development is not generating any income for the city. So maybe they should consider developing in the style that they had prior to 1951. Because the value in the city didn't come from just owning more land. It came from how that land was built upon, used, and connected.
So there you have it. That's the presentation. I mean, she summed it up in 2 minutes. What could take an hour to do, but
Check out.
I'll skip over. I mean, in our comprehensive plan, we lay out a vision for a city that's more walkable and privileges other ways of getting around other than the personal automobile. Maybe not. We talk about a city that is more efficient in the way it uses its land base. We have a very limited land base in the city, and a lot of our land is tax exempt. So we need to leverage what we have. We have a number of plan priorities that talk about that. When we talk about growth in the plan, we talk about projects like this on Annapolis Street in West Annapolis, where you have retail at the ground floor, apartments above. It blends with the neighborhood in a really seamless way. And then in our mapping in the comprehensive plan, our future land use map, we talk about where that type of mixed use development makes the most sense. And you can see all of the red parcels are primarily along our major corridors, our community's main streets throughout the city. Now, Urban 3 is a unique economic consultant that really tries to promote this sort of more sensible, efficient use of land base for fiscal responsible places. Really, it's helping cities and counties and just incorporated places leverage their assets. And so they use this example from Asheville, North Carolina, where a building that was, vacant, valued in 1991 at $300,000 is today valued at $11 million. It's a large building, but this is the kind of value that was captured in that building as a mixed-use property that had retail and offices and residential all combined, compatible uses. They also use this comparison between that building and a typical Walmart in Asheville, where maybe the tax value from that Walmart is more than the tax value of that downtown building, but the land consumed by that Walmart is far greater than that small downtown building. And yet look at the tax assessment per acre of that downtown building versus the Walmart. So while it may not be yielding the total tax of Walmart, it's much more efficient in the economic performance. And then on top of that, it's generating more sales tax per acre, more residents per acre, more jobs per acre. When we look at our city finances, we're talking about revenues and expenditures, and a large portion of our revenue come from property tax. We all know that. And so Urban 3's analysis was all about helping us understand how to leverage property taxes to their fullest. this is another way of looking at it. When we bring in these revenues, where they go in our city's budget, we're mapping property taxes. And so first thing Urban 3 does is they show us, based on just purely tax assessed value, how does the city's properties compare? And everything in green is sort of lowest value, but still, relatively high value. It's 100,000 to $1 million. So it's still high value in green, but purple is over 15 million in tax assessed value. Now, that's just based on what the state's tax assessment says. If you actually look at it based on the acreage, you can see that we have far greater tax assessed value in the downtown area and the Eastport area. We have denser sites occupying less land. They happen to be by the water. That can't be discounted. But that's a different story here. Taxable value per acre. And if you look at this kind of pattern nationwide, Urban 3 works all over the country, you can see that there are trends to the value that's captured with different types of development, as I've been saying. So when they do their economic model and they try to visualize it, they do these everywhere they work, every place they work. We're not looking at the scale of a building. We're looking at the value of a property extruded. So these purple mountains are the most valuable properties in the city in terms of value per acre. You can see Park Place, the Park Place condos at Westgate Circle are kind of going off the chart here, and then downtown represents the highest otherwise. Yes?
Should note that Park Place Condos is the #1 revenue generator in all of Anne Arundel County.
Not surprised. And then you can see Annapolis in the context of the county. You can see, this, you're not seeing my cursor, but there's the purple extrusions outside of the city or Parole. And, they compare Annapolis to the county using something called a productivity ratio. And based on the land that we occupy, we generate 4.5 times more than the county's productivity ratio. So that's really important. And when you look at downtown, in comparison to the county, that's 22 times more productive than other places in the county. So when Urban 3 did their final works presentation to City Council back in June of 2024, it was probably the most engrossing presentation I've seen because they were kind of giving us the data to say, hey, Annapolis generates a tremendous amount of value for the county and for the state. We have a lot of tax-exempt properties in the city. We get payments in lieu from the state, I think from the county. This gives us something to sort of ground that to. Are we getting an equitable amount for the value that we provide? When you look at the actual properties here, it's striking. Small properties near the city dock, like the Dock Street Bar and Grill, $63 million per acre. The Dean Street condos in Murray Hill, $54 million per acre. And then the Waterfront Hotel, $25 million per acre. And then you kind of expand the view, and you can kind of get another set of just examples of both properties that generate a lot of tax revenue and ones that don't per acre. And we're going to get into that pattern here. So they look at land use types. Again, starting with your Walmart type, we don't have a Walmart in Annapolis. We have things that are close to that, but this is sort of their baseline. 1.1 million per acre for the Walmart closest to here, which I think is Crofton?
Severn and Bowie.
Severn Bowie, okay. So think about that 1.1 million per acre, and then we're going to go into residential land use types, starting with single-family detached houses. variety of those in the city. They average out at about 1.8 million per acre. So just a little bit more than a Walmart. Starting to go up in scale and density a little bit. These multifamily residential, variety of them, triplex, small town duplexes, and some multi-story, multifamily, just a range, but 2.5 million per acre for generally multifamily apartment or condo buildings across a variety of types. And then you look at townhouses, and this is on average 4.2 million per acre. So you can see the kind of efficiencies that you gain. Then there's Park Place, 127 million per acre. But this is just in summary. The townhomes are a efficient and valuable type of development for the type of land pattern that we have here. And there are quite a few of those going back a few centuries. And then if you look at neighborhood scale analysis, Heritage neighborhood here compared to Hunt Meadow, compared to the Clay Street Old Fourth Ward community. This really surprised people to see that the value per acre of the Clay Street community was greater than Hunt Meadow or Heritage. And it just goes to the sort of development pattern. It's denser. It is closer to downtown, but there are takeaways from this in the type of development and the as you'll see later.
Eric,
Yeah.
can I ask you to, back on the 3-picture slide, the value per acre, can you dive into what that means a little bit more?
Yeah, it's basically creating a metric that is placing value on the size of a property on its percent of acreage. So think about it this way: a property that is, you have two properties, they're each 1 acre. One is valued at a lot more than the other, as a higher value per acre. It's trying to come up with a baseline to compare properties across the city. They're all varying amounts of acreage. So this is actually the best example. Yeah, it is trying to normalize it. The firm is based in Asheville, so they use the Biltmore Estate, which is the most expensive residence in the country. It's valued at like $180 million. And it's on an enormous piece of land. When you actually look at the value per acre, it's significantly less valuable than other properties because it's just spread out over a really large site. That $180 million is spread out over, hundreds of acres, right? So it gets kind of diluted across, whereas with smaller sites, you sort of have this concentrated value on a smaller piece of property. And so it gives you a kind of productivity of that property that you could compare. Is that making, Alderman Schneidermeyer, do you want to?
You can kind of think of it where even if you have one larger property that is hypothetically, as an individual unit, generating more property tax, these smaller, denser units are generating more as a collective. And because they are closer together in a standardized measurement format, the acre, we can get more revenue for the city through that standardized measurement format.
In a way, it's also like,
Think of it like the unit price
if you don't mind,
when you
Eric,
go grocery shopping.
because what we're talking about here, one, we got to make sure it's in order, but also a heritage neighborhood, of course, it's in Ward 3. How do we, on top of the question that was just asked, ensure that there's neighborhood integrity, or which keep it to the characteristics and the families or my neighbors here who concern that, hey, we paid for this family home and we want to keep our property. How do we balance that as well as meeting the needs of our aging infrastructure and needing more money to be able to put toward that? So where can we get the balance from if that, because what it sounds like is we're going to ask our families, in their perspective, to sacrifice what they put their money into. So how do we balance that need alongside what I just mentioned?
Well, in theory, property taxes are based on the assessed value of a property, right? And that is supposed to pay for the services that, are rendered to that property, the utilities, the school, the police, all of the things that come with living in a certain place. But as the analysis proved later, those taxes can't keep up with the types of services. So it's a challenge. And the reason why we're doing this is to understand, are there development types or patterns that have a greater return? It can allow the city to provide better service because we have higher revenue.
Can I jump in on that point? I think the other thing to keep in mind is that part of the question that's in front of us as a result of this is, what are the next things that the city should prioritize doing? And I think it's, in some ways, I think part of the concern that gets raised is, you're going to change my home. I'm being asked to change my home. And I'm not sure that's really necessarily the thing that's on the table in front of us right now. I think that, part of what the comprehensive plan does is it identifies some opportunity zones within the city of places that could be redeveloped and things like that. And as we're looking at that effort, what are the things that we might want to try to incentivize there?
Yeah.
Not necessarily on every single property in the city, but in these opportunity areas. What should we be?
That's right.
What should we be looking at?
That's right. Thanks for clarifying that. That may have been what you were getting at. This is not about saying we're going to completely reimagine these established neighborhoods. It's about saying when we do have the opportunities to develop in other parts of the city, we have a lot of aging shopping centers, for example, that might get redeveloped at some point. Well, what gets built there in the future? There are lessons to be learned from this analysis that can help us say, hey, maybe we shouldn't build, this very suburban neighborhood here that has super wide streets, and maybe we should be more strategic about how we use that land and what type of housing is not being built today in Annapolis. Should we be encouraging that type of development, or what types of households can't afford to live here? So that's kind of more it's about forward thinking.
Absolutely, but when we look at that map, a lot of the impact will happen in Ward 3. And so when I think of the families that I've spoken with, particularly not just in the heritage community, but the surrounding areas, and they question, okay, well, can the priority be in my industrial part of the ward versus these family residential homes? And they concern or worry that across the street, someone will buy that property and be able to develop in this mixed-use, change or alteration that we're going into, which I'm definitely not opposed to. I mean, that's not what I'm really speaking about. I'm more so speaking about the protections of those families who are concerned about that in their neighborhood. Because yes, the understanding is it's going to be prioritized in specific parts of the city. And so when you see that a majority no longer doesn't have to be here downtown, because we see it all around us, but in those areas like Ward 3 and maybe a little bit of Ward 4, I saw a little bit there, even maybe Ward 6, and definitely Ward 8 a little, and even Ward 5. I mean, when you talk about the outskirts of the areas, there are families that they want to protect that area from developers who may come in, and so how do we do that?
Yeah, that's specifically a zoning discussion, and I'll put a plug in for this work session that we're going to have on February 19th with the full council, where we're going to show you how we are starting to look at improving our zoning across the city. And because that is exactly what dictates what gets built, what can get built, how, and there are many things we can do to improve that and provide some confidence to folks that, that their neighborhood that they like is going to stay that way. And so I have some slides towards the end that get at like how we're looking at that, but
Alderman Thorpe, please.
yeah.
I'm still stuck on my question. So back on that 3 slide before that, and I'm not debating it.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand it. The average value per acre is, so I get that we're trying to value compare, but I'm trying to get my arms around 1.2 in Heritage and 2 on Clay Street. I'm just trying to get so is it because it's more dense on Clay
Yeah.
Street?
Yeah, that's
Is that
exactly
the idea?
it.
Is that,
That's exactly it. There's a lot more space around the houses in Heritage or in Hunt Meadow, which dilutes their value, in terms of taxable. It may seem like they're assessed high amounts. When you look at it for the side, like half-acre property in Hunt Meadow is assessed at a certain value in comparison to a property on Clay Street that's, less than a quarter of an acre or, a eighth of an acre or
Yeah.
something. It's when you actually look at it, the amount of space that property takes up, or the building more than anything, really.
so this goes to Alderman Schannemeyer's point, from a average value per acre. What this is pointing out is that Park Place, when you have mixed use, commercial there, as well as, 6 stories high residential, it's a lot more like Clay Street than it is Heritage or Hunt Meadow.
Yes, exactly.
That's really the point.
It's the density, and I think this is about finding what is appropriate for now. There's like some incredibly there's some great examples of historic types of structures in the city that have like what I call the gentle density, like in your ward, or in Ward 3, I mean, every ward has some examples of this built at different periods, but they don't all have to be Park Place,
Right.
but just something other than a single-family detached house. But
And, and I think one of the things that was interesting about the results of this study, the sort of the next logical thought is that density always pays. But that is not, in fact, what this study necessarily found, was that there was sort of a sweet spot.
yeah, like this is sort of like, I mean, not every apartment building like that in the middle, that multifamily, is going to have the same sort of return as just a townhouse development. And that's partly because many of these townhouses are getting much bigger in scale, right? They're not just little row houses anymore, but they take up less, they don't take up a lot of space. So there is a sweet spot there. All right, let me keep moving here.
Please.
Because when you look at commercial properties, you start with the big box stores averaging, that 1.1 million. These are all examples in Annapolis: Giant Food, Safeway, Kohl's. And then you start to look at the sort of more neighborhood scale commercial. This is all West Annapolis, but we're in between 2.2 million and 17 million for the newest property. That Bean Rush is 6.5 million per acre. And then downtown, it just gets astronomical, for lots of other reasons. I mean, it's a historic district, it's close to the water, it's gets a lot of tourism, but the numbers are 28 million per acre, 47 million per acre, $63 million per acre. And what this analysis also looked at was just the fact that our oldest buildings retain that value. Now, again, these are all in downtown, which has these added values, but building like this on Maryland Avenue from 1800 28 million per acre, right next to City Hall here, set from 1704, $26 million per acre. It's a bed and breakfast. Not far from here, from 1680, 5.6 million per acre. And so when you look at these very early buildings in the city, the amount of land that they consume and the value they generate in comparison to a Walmart, there's some real impressive takeaways in terms of just being more efficient. And the way we built the city in our earliest days, there are some great lessons to be learned from that. You could also see taxes, so it's not just the acreage consumed, but yeah, it's the value per acre and the city taxes per acre. And so there's another way of looking at it. The three, there's residential, commercial, and mixed use on the left side there, and then the density types for each type of land use, from low density to high density. You can kind of see it. High density doesn't necessarily mean super high density. It can be kind of a medium density, something that's appropriate for Annapolis. And another way of looking at it where, you just, location matters in many cases, but there's just the type of density, the type of, the way the land is utilized for these developments matters even more. The study also looked at parking because parking takes up a lot of space in the city. You can see here what they're calling other land is essentially green space, space around buildings, forested areas. So that's 5 square miles of the city is that other land. Buildings take up almost 1 square mile when you add them all up. Parking is 0.7 square miles when you add that all up in red. And then roadway is 0.7 square miles.
There appears to be a lot more red in Eastport than is reality.
It's funny. It's all of that stuff on Spa Creek there, yeah. But then when you look at the value that's generated by that parking is not so much in comparison to the space that it takes up, whereas buildings take up a pretty small portion of the city in total, and they generate $4.2 billion. Roads are negative. We maintain those, and that's a theme in the study as well. All of the infrastructure that we maintain, it doesn't generate value per se. And so when you look at that average amount of space per person, based on our population of around 40,000 people, it's about 29% of the city for each person based on the parking. And then the value is just another way of looking at how out of whack the parking versus building and the amount of space it takes up. This is really, this is where it kind of makes for the most compelling argument for kind of how we've evolved as a city and why this matters more than ever right now. When you look at how the city started with our original core of the city was where we are today, from before 1700 to 1800. We expanded out between 1800 and 1920. On the bottom, you can see how our population density is going up. And then it kind of flatlines a bit as we expand a bit more between 1920 and 1950. And then,
for clarity, is this annexation for
yes,
people to know?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
thank
this
you.
was through annexation. And so, this is the big one in 1951 where we, Annapolis annexed Eastport, West Annapolis, Parole, portions along Forest Drive. You could see how the population dipped in that bottom chart because this was farmland. There wasn't any development in a lot of these areas. And then as we've picked up additional parcels and we've developed some of this annexed land, the population density is starting to go up again until today, where it really, the funny thing is, we're at the same population density we were in 1855, but we're like 10 times more space. So we lived in a much denser way in 1855, and as we've spread out, we've just, kind of taken on a very low density development pattern. And so you can see the roadway network over those annexation periods, and how we kind of got away from the pattern of streets that are in downtown to this more suburban pattern in a lot of places during the 1951 to today period. So they share this slide because we've built roads. This is a commercial for diamonds that they've turned into this ad for roads. But the basic meaning is we've built a lot of roadways over the city's history, and we have to take care of those roads. We rarely take out roadways, and so it adds to the city's responsibilities. And today, when you count up lane miles in the city, of our small 8 square mile city, we have enough lane miles to get to Bridgeport, Connecticut. And maybe we have fewer road lane miles than other places, but it's a lot to maintain. So I'm skipping over quite a bit of analysis. They then went into analysis to show how we could get some sense of what we pay to service each property in the city based on where they're located, the development pattern. They have a model that they use to basically say, well, how much does it cost to service each property in the city? And they end up with this graphic, which shows everything in black is an extrusion of its value in a positive, whereas everything in red is negative, meaning it's not generating enough value to pay for the cost of servicing that property. So you can see the theme here is that essentially everything built before 1951 is very much net positive, whereas the majority of what was built after 1951 is net negative. Now, the theme, when you look at those pre-1951 places, they had a greater range of housing types. This is a graphic we use over and over again. It's become popular to explain the range of housing that sustainable cities have, and Annapolis has, but we're just not building that range of housing anymore. But the places in 1951 did have that full range, that full spectrum. In the comp plan, we show a whole range of examples of these types of missing middle housing types that already exist here from all different periods, some almost current, that were built. But most of this housing is not legal today. It's not allowed by our zoning code. And it's the kind of housing that's given the city definition and character. So we ultimately want to make Annapolis more Annapolis. We want to understand the types of buildings and structures that define the city over time and make sure our zoning code can support those. Today, everything in yellow on this map, this was another graphic from the comprehensive plan. Everything in yellow is a area that's zoned for residential use only, but does not allow for just a basic duplex, which is either apartments, one apartment on top of another, or one house next to one another. There's lots of those in the city today, lots and lots that were built in prior decades. And then everything in red is everything zoned for commercial use that does also does not allow for a basic duplex. So can't help but think that we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not allowing for some of these types of housing that could add value to the city, address our housing needs, and are completely consistent with development patterns of the city historically. And then when you look at equity issues, we map social vulnerability in the comprehensive plan using metrics from the Centers for Disease Control. Everything in darker blue represent higher social vulnerability. A lot of that is socioeconomic factors. You can see that kind of arc along the Forest Drive corridor. And then the area closer to downtown is the Clay Street community. When you look nationally, a lot of these more socially vulnerable communities predominate in the South. And there's a strong correlation between social vulnerability and race in the city. You can see in the map on the left, the multicolored dots represent different racial households, Black, Hispanic, Asian, whereas everything in light blue represents a predominantly white household. You can see the direct correlation there between social vulnerability and race. And then transportation has an impact on development pattern, to be sure, and it has an opportunity to help us address a variety of problems beyond just getting around. This was a quote from the comprehensive plan that we used, talking about transportation as something that can help us address public health and economic development and environmental goals. And when you look at our roadway network and where the crashes are most prominent, you can see along our major corridors, Forest Drive, West Street, and then some hotspot intersections like at Rowell Boulevard and Taylor. When you correlate all of those things, you see a strong correlation between social vulnerability, race, and vehicle crashes in the city. I'm showing you this just because when we talk about development patterns, these are also the places where we've had this kind of suburban expansion of the city, which, in some ways has affected quality of life and public health when you look at these kinds of statistics. So I'm just going to close by saying this is something I'm going to share in much greater depth on February 19th, but to try to address some of these patterns and see how our zoning regulations can help us to develop more efficiently and strategically, we came up with this initiative called Zoning Unlocked, Clear Code for a Thriving Annapolis. We recognize that over time, the zoning map and the zoning regulations have gotten to a point where they're almost too complex for most people to understand. There's opportunities to make them more intuitive, address city goals, and provide greater consistency with the future land use map that's in the comprehensive plan. And so that's what's on the left here, which really just breaks down the city into where does it make most sense to have residential use, green space, mixed use development, institutional uses, maritime uses. We have about six to eight categories of land use. On the right is our zoning map. There's very little correlation between these two things. Over time, the zoning map has just gotten to a point where it doesn't really represent any sort of vision anymore. Today, it's 32 different zoning districts. It also includes an open space zone that's not even on the map, we realized recently, and that's part of our work, putting that to use. And I want to share this example from Charlottesville, which did a rezoning in the last couple of years, right after they finished their comprehensive plan, and they were able to redesign their zoning map so it actually reflects their future land use map in a pretty clear way. That's ultimately we want to get to. So we have 4 phases of our Zoning Unlocked project. We're in phase 2 right now. That's what we're going to focus on in our work session. We completed phase 1, which led to this Tyler Avenue Complete Community Overlay District. And this was essentially putting into practice what this Urban 3 study talks about. We met with community members on Tyler Avenue multiple times and really found like a sweet spot that the type of housing that would not take away from the character of what's there today, but could better utilize the sizable amount of land that's there that's not developed yet. We wanted to make sure that as that land gets developed, we're more strategic about it. And so just this is one image that from actually a different project, but we found that it resonated for the kind of character that we're trying to create along Tyler Avenue. And just one basic example is we found a lot of people wanted to see more small single-family homes. And there's some good examples there today on Tyler Avenue, but you can't build those anymore. They don't make any economic sense. And so because you need a very large lot to build any new house based on our zoning code. So we changed with this Tyler Avenue overlay zone, we said, if you have a lot that's half the size of what you need today, then you can build this smaller single-family house. And that hopefully will open up some new opportunities. Ultimately, we're trying to eliminate some of the zones on this map that are either out of date, inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, redundant, or community-supported opportunities so that we can have a map that doesn't include so many zones. And we have a website for this project, Zoning Unlocked, that's we keep up to date. So that's it. I know I went well over, but thanks for your patience.
Thank you,
I'm happy to
Eric.
stick around if,
Yeah, I know we don't really have an end per se, 8 o'clock. You want to go first, Alderman Shannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Lucinski, thank you again for presenting this. I always love this presentation. I do encourage my colleagues to go onto the city website and watch the video if you have a fun 2.5 hours to kill. It's fun to have on in the background. But one thing that was not covered tonight that I do think is very much worth stressing is the city does have what I'll call, for lack of a better term, an infrastructure funding deficit. The study broke down what we currently spend on infrastructure maintenance and what we need to be spending in order to actually have our roads, our sidewalks, our water, our sewer systems at what people would call an adequate level. And the current deficit is $23.4 million a year. And why that does not show up in our budget is we defer maintenance. The other very relevant thing in the larger presentation, and why I really do think that you should watch the entire video, is it shows the infrastructure built around that growth pattern. A lot of that land that was annexed in the 1950s, infrastructure was built for it. Water, sewer, massive roads, sidewalks was built for it in the 70s. And the useful lifespan for those roadways, those water systems, those sewer systems, and those sidewalks is hitting around 2030. Meaning around 2030, which is when probably a lot of us will still be on this council, maybe all of us, we're going to either have to defer maintenance and see sidewalks crumble even further, sewer lines and water lines break even more than we are currently seeing in the Forest Drive area. We'll either or raise taxes a significant amount, or follow along with some of the land use decisions that the study recommends for us. These are our three options. Watch our infrastructure fail, raise taxes to an incredibly high amount. I believe in the original study, he told us a number that I cannot remember off the top of my head, but let's just say it will dash your chances of reelection. Or follow the land use decisions recommendations.
Yeah, I should have mentioned early on, but I think you all know that there's this typical binary decision that you make as elected officials in terms of how to fund things. It's you raise taxes, which nobody wants to do, or you take money from other things to pay for something that's more important. And I think what this is trying to say is there are ways to generate additional money. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's about trying to put in place the mechanism that would allow us to generate more revenue. But
Yes, Alderman Thorpe, please.
This might not be the right venue for this question, but when, on zoning consolidation, can you tell me where your head is on changing the maritime zones?
We're not touching the maritime zone.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's really that focus, and again, I'll go into it on February 19th. The priority, the low-hanging fruit, there's a range of zones that were created over the last 30 years that were very specific nuances of other zones that seem to have outlived their original intent to the point where they're not achieving anything else at this point. So
So I presume you're also not talking about messing with R2NC.
no, that's not a priority either.
Thank you.
Sure.
But you said you're going to come back for a work session, so let's not ask. I have so many questions. We should wait till that work session so we
That
can
work
all
session is going to focus
Yeah.
exclusively on this zoning unlocked initiative. So
And will you have the ability, or are you able to, because of course you have the ability to send us that map online? Is there a detail of what each residential district means? Because this map isn't extremely helpful for the average person, for accessibility of that detail. So is there a way you can maybe combine them, or, provide us links to which two to use at the same time, or what have you?
yeah, that's a good point. The city does have an interactive zoning map where you can click on a property and it tells, but it doesn't necessarily tell you, and it's because it's not an easy answer, what you could do on that property in an R1 zone or an R2 zone. But I think what our office could probably do would be kind of related to what we're already doing, is come up with some just simple definition. Every zone does have a purpose statement, I should say that. And that's the best place to understand what is the intent of that zoning district. The purpose statement is usually just one sentence. And so that actually, we could talk with our GIS folks and see if they could just add that purpose statement maybe, so that when you're browsing through the map,
Purpose statement and whatever else you can provide, whatever's not too taxing on you all. Of course, we need that tax money, though. I believe that's the wrap up here. I know we're kind of almost 8:30. If there's no more questions or thoughts or concerns, we just really appreciate the time and the information. I also love hearing about this. That's about the future of our people. And so, okay, well, you have a great rest of your night. If you don't mind, just send that over to us. We appreciate everything. As we look at this agenda, we have reached the end. Is there any other questions or comments, though, for the, as we say, good of the order? Okay, well, I will say for one of our future meetings, it'd be great if we can invite the Maryland State Board of Elections and or the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections as we begin to talk about some of the shifts that we're going to make, not only for our board, that's a conversation we already had, but more so shifting the way that our elections will be run in the city. So I want to make sure that that's on a record. We want to invite those persons, if not both, one or the other. Okay, so is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
All right, thank you. We have adjourned this meeting. All in favor, we know what it is, 8:26 p.m. Thank you.